medical marijuana. And that to me was the conversion, if you will, to enable us to be more helpful to people who are not presently attaining the kind of results to their from their medication, which is usually opiates.
And one more thing, obviously, it wasn't a clip I hoped for, but we are not in, he says, we are not in the marijuana business. We are in the health delivery system. What's your reaction to that, Judy?
Well, we had thousands of dispensaries across this country for years using peaceful civil disobedience to serve the patients who he mentioned that weren't getting access from the government. So the government was ordered by the courts to provide access to patients in need. So the very same companies that he's now telling people to buy pot from exist solely because lawbreakers went to court and won after suffering persecution from law enforcement. So for them to not call for the end to that prohibition, to not apologize for fighting legalization, and to cash in on a system that profits off of patients while they wait to serve the recreational market and make even more money, let's remember the federal government is introducing tougher penalties. They're saying that the existing market won't be legalized, that they're not going to cut law enforcement spending, and they're not going to issue pardons and amnesty. So what's being legalized other than the ability of the rich and connected few to make money off of pot while they send government gunmen to shut down their competition like we're seeing every day across this country? It's appalling.
You also mentioned another former Toronto Police Chief, Bill Blair, today. Do you think, since he is in charge of helping to create these rules and regulations, that he should not be allowed to become involved in the marijuana business after he leaves office?
I would prefer he not, but I just asked on Twitter if people think he will get in the pot business, and overwhelmingly people say yes. I just saw Bill Blair speak last night, and he's going on and on about the harms of marijuana, the danger of marijuana, the crackdown, the law enforcement, the criminal penalties. And meanwhile, his own deputy chief, Kim Derry, also runs a pot company. So they're all cashing in on pot while their buddies continue to get paid to bust people for pot. And it's people like me and my fellow advocates and patients who are stunned to see that we're being locked out from participating and locked up by the very same people who are now cashing in on the industry that we fought and struggled and have been jailed over.
What do you say, though, to those who say to you, you broke the rules while they were still rules against what you were doing?
Well, those lawbreakers, like I mentioned, are the only reason we've got legal medical marijuana in this country. The government has never provided more access. It's been decades of dispensaries, growers, and patients getting arrested, going to court, paying lawyers millions of dollars to win in court and have the courts order the government to provide access. Bill Blair also admits that. He said the government doesn't support medical marijuana. We only provide it because charter rights of patients need to be protected. But let's remember that all these licensed producers, these cops and politicians are part of, are going to abandon their patients on July 1st to serve the recreational market with supply that they can't even keep up. Meanwhile, the existing industry is supplying the demand. It's 95% law-abiding people with no connections to gangs. The government knows that marijuana consumers and growers and the industry are not dangerous people, yet they continue to criminalize us.
You think that there should be a pardon system for people who are convicted of marijuana-related charges?
Absolutely.
Everyone?
I know people would just be comfortable at first starting with simple possession, and that's hundreds of thousands of people, so let's do that. But then you need to look at trafficking, and remember that Bill Blair and Justin Trudeau both admit marijuana law enforcement disproportionately targets Black and Aboriginal and people of color and marginalized and youth. Bill Blair said it's, quote, one of the great injustices in this country. And yet they do nothing about it. So they keep arresting people and keep criminalizing it and refuse to admit that criminalization of cannabis was wrong, and that's why we're supposed to legalize it. But they don't want to legalize what's happening. They don't want to apologize. They want to keep the status quo and cash in a little extra themselves.
Some people say it's heading in the way of big tobacco. Canada's largest marijuana company, Canopy Growth Corp, says it's worth $1 billion. Aurora Cannabis Incorporated proposed the largest takeover bid in Canada's marijuana market, according to the Financial Post, in an attempt to expand to Europe. So that's where people say it's headed, similar to big tobacco with big major players and big companies. Where does a company like you used to have, where do the smaller dispensaries end up on the retail chain?
Oh, well, literally, we're ending up at the end of guns and in handcuffs and in cells and
So
in
there's
court.
no, but there's no way you can afford. There's no way you can access that.
No, we can't. You need millions and millions of dollars. You need to have security clearances that prohibit anyone who's been criminalized from taking part. So those of us who have been victims of prohibition aren't even allowed to own legal pot companies. And let's also remember that a lot of these politicians and law enforcement officers are going into this industry knowing that they get to have the government arrest their competition. And these same companies in big business have been soliciting money from people in this stock market to try and finance the expensive hurdles they need to meet. So that brings in a lot of big money. And that also brings in questions like Anne McClellan, head of the task force, works for Bennett Jones Law, who's involved in promoting pot. You've got all these different task force members like Sukar joining up for legal marijuana businesses after taking part in the task force. And Chuck
You're talking about Sukar, who is the ex-RCMP deputy commissioner, who is now the president and CEO of the company that Julian Fantino works for.
Right, and Trudeau's chief financial officer, Chuck Rafisi, left the Liberal Party, started up a pot company that turned into Tweed, that turned into Canopy. Now he's got another pot financing. These guys are literally making millions of dollars while people like us have been stripped of everything we've owned. And let's remember, my husband was sent to U.S. prison for financing legalization.
I remember.
We already suffered years of persecution and punishment and barely got by as a single income earner trying to survive and campaign and run for office for the Liberals. And we worked hard and suffered and sacrificed, and our oppressors are actually cashing in and keeping us locked out. So it does reek of injustice.
Jody Emery, cannabis activist and owner of Cannabis Culture magazine, which used to own a number of dispensaries as well. Jody, thank you.
Thank you for your time.